In this video we're going to look at Genesis 6 and how to interpret Genesis 6. You can see here that we're going to use the same method as in the other videos, the GPS method. And the reason why we use the GPS method is that our target group is in the 21st century. This is where we live. And the Bible was written many years ago, about 2,000 years ago it came into being. So we will go through the processes of understanding, application, and communication when we analyze Genesis 6. So let us start by reading Genesis chapter 6 from verse 5. The Lord saw how great man's wickedness on the earth had become, and that every inclination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil at the time. The Lord was grieved that he had made man on the earth, and his heart was filled with pain. So the Lord said, I will wipe mankind, whom I have created from the face of the earth, men and animals and creatures that move along the ground, and birds in the air, for I am grieved that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. So our first step is we start with a process of understanding, and we have the acronym of START. So the first one is the situation. We need to determine what is the situation of Genesis 6. We get it in verse 5. The Lord saw how great man's wickedness on the earth had become. And in the other chapters you get an idea what this wickedness was all about. We see in Genesis 2 and 3, Adam and Eve who listened to the serpent. They disobeyed God. In chapter 4, Cain killed his brother Abel. And then in chapter 5, we saw that in the genealogy of Cain, actually Abel, he had one person in his genealogy, Lamech, who became very evil by saying, that he will avenge him 70 times 7. He was actually very arrogant. So God saw this wickedness. So that is the background of this passage. So one can say the wickedness will be the situation. And what type of literature? We see that when we read this, it is prose, and it's a certain kind of prose. It's a narrative, and narratives, as we've seen in the previous video, can be divided in stories and conversation and parables. So this will be a story. And now we're going to analysis, the third step in the process of understanding. So when we analyze narratives, we've seen that we look in a story for episodes. Now, an episode is a chain of events that are related, having the same location, time, and major participants. So in these verses, we have an episode. And then we determine the plot structure. And we know that the plot structure is there to create tension. It's the way in which the story develops and serves to keep the interest of the reader. So let us see if we can find the plot structure. Let's go to verse 5. The Lord saw how great the wickedness on man's wickedness on the earth had become, and that every inclination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil at the time. The Lord was grieved that he had made man on the earth, and his heart was filled with pain. One can see, here is a lot of tension. It's actually one of the saddest verses in the Bible. God grieves because of our wickedness. God grieves. So that is the tension. One can say it's caused by a problem. The element that causes tension in this case will be a problem. Now we read further. So the Lord said, I will wipe mankind, whom I have created from the face of the earth, men and animals, and creatures that move along the ground, and birds in the air, for I am grieved that I have made them. So, what is the solution of these problems? The solution of this is that God decides to destroy human beings. is going to make an end, destroy human beings because of their wickedness. God is sad, He's grieved. And normally, as we've seen in the previous video, that story has normally an outcome. You have the tension, you have the relief of tension, that's the solution, that God decides, I'm going to destroy. And the outcome we get in verse 8, or the result of the story. And this is, God changes His mind. God changes His mind. So God decided not to destroy human beings. And if this is still, we are still part in the process of an analysis. So in this process we determine the plot structure, and we see that this is one episode, the plot structure, and then we also see what's the flow of this episode, and then we determine the main elements of this episode. The Lord saw how great the wickedness of man's wickedness on the earth, and God was grieved. A very sad verse, that He had made man on the earth. So one can say this is maybe the first thought, this kind of problem. And we can summarize this with God grieves. And then we see the next thought is the solution, that is B. And then C is the outcome, the very good outcome, that God has decided to change His mind. He is not going to destroy human beings. And then part of analysis is we get to a message to the original receiver, and it is normally a result of our findings when we determine the message to the original receiver. So that's not too difficult to determine it in this instance. One can say that God can change His mind. God can change His mind because He's loving and caring. And then another message, God's love always, and I love this one, supersedes His wrath. God's love always supersedes His wrath. And then one can also say the evil heart of human beings grieves God. It has an impact on God. It's just important to know that in a story, the message is always implied. It's not explicit. It is always implied. When you read Paul likes to be explicit, but in narratives you will get the message. You need to make your assumptions. It is implied. So we can see that the message is God can change His mind because His love always supersedes His wrath, and the evil heart of human beings grieves the heart of God. So this is in our process of analysis. Then the next step is, does this message relate to the rest of the Bible? And if you read the rest of the Bible, I'd just like to mention two other passages in the Bible. The first one is Genesis 18. Abram saw Sodom and Gomorrah. His nephew Lot lives there, and it's wicked, and God decided to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. And then in Genesis 18, Abram is actually negotiating, bargaining with God, and said, God, for 50 people, will you please spare the city? And God said yes. For 45, for 40, and God said yes. And then for 30, for 20, even for 10, God was willing to save Sodom and Gomorrah. So God was willing to change His mind because He's loving and caring and compassionate. Another example is Jonah. Jonah needs to go to Nineveh and said, in 40 days you will be destroyed. And then what happened? They repented, and then in Jonah 3 verse 10 it says that God decided not to destroy Nineveh. So God changed His mind there as well. So we can see it relates to the rest of the Bible. And then we can read Bible commentaries or study Bibles to test our findings. And I promise you, when you read a Bible commentary, you will be spot on. So one can say that the message to the original receiver is God can change his mind. God's love always supersedes his wrath. And the evil heart of human beings grieves God. So we can say, okay, let's bring it over there. That is the message to the original receiver. And then in the steps of application, we need to ask ourselves, is this message to the original receiver ceremonial, cultural, or civil? Because these three things, we say these are incidentals. We don't apply it in the 21st century because it's ceremonial. It has been fulfilled in Jesus Christ. All the ceremonial laws, cultural, our culture is different, and the civil laws of those days are different from ours as well. So we see that this message to the original receiver, that the wickedness of human beings grieves the heart of God, God can change his mind, and God's love always supersedes his wrath. We see it has nothing to do with ceremonial laws. It has nothing to do with cultural laws. It has nothing to do with civil laws. It is immoral because it has to do with care, love, and relationships. So we realize that something that's moral is essential. And the essentials we do apply in the 21st century because it was true there, it's true now, and will be true forever. So we apply to our target group. Maybe your target group is a friend to ask you, do you really think that God can change his mind, And then you can say, yes, God is willing to change his mind because he's loving and caring. And that is why God is such a great God. He's willing to forgive and to give us a new chance in life, like Nineveh and other examples in the Bible as well. So we've seen in this episode that you go through the process of understanding to get to the message to the original receiver. We see whether we can apply it or not. It's moral, so we do apply, and we can communicate that message in the 21st century.